getting to the truth. Few criminal cases have done more to test that process than Stephen Lawrence's murder. When truth was obscured by mistakes or fear, trust in the police fell away. Crimes they just could not or would not resolve. The detective who convicted Lawrence's killers is now ready to reveal how obstacles were put in the way of his investigations.
Some people did not want a successful prosecution.
Tonight he tells us how in that case and his inquiry into child abuse in 1980's Lambeth, barriers, even politics, appeared.
At the time, I just felt that it was all too uncomfortable to a lot of people.
In these most contentious of cases, has truth been a victim too? Clive Driscoll worked for the Met for more than 3 decades, until just a few weeks ago. His detective work led finally to the successful convictions of Stephen Lawrence's killers. But what he describes as his apprenticeship for that politically charged case was perhaps just as contentious. And at that time, the detective's involvement had a very different outcome. In 1998, he worked in child protection and was moved to investigate allegations of child abuse in children's homes in Lambeth in South London, alleged to have taken place in the 1980s. But his lines of inquiry quickly proved just too awkward.
There was a mistrust on both sides. It appeared that certainly that people didn't trust the Metropolitan Police Service, and I think that the Metropolitan Police Service possibly didn't trust some of the people that it was working with. A bit like young Stephen's investigation, I never felt there was a wall of silence. But whenever people spoke to you and shared their fears and their story about what they'd seen, it was almost on the proviso that they wouldn't make a statement and that they would be scared if you released who those people were that were talking for fear of reprisals. It was a very, very difficult climate for people to come forward in, but very bravely, in my opinion, they did come forward, and I passed the names on that had been passed to me as potential suspects.
When he revealed those names, including politicians, at a case meeting, he was taken off the investigation and subjected to a disciplinary.
After discussing internally with the Metropolitan Police Service whether or not I should release certain information to Lambeth Council, which I hadn't done up to then, it was agreed by my senior management team that that's what I would do. And after I did disclose, because I did, I most certainly in a case conference disclosed suspects' names, 100%, that I was informed that that was inappropriate and that in fact that I would be moved for my post.
And that information included politicians' names as potential suspects?
There was actually a mix. There were certainly some of the names were people that were locally working, some people that were, if you like, working nationally. There was quite a mix really, because of it appeared that it was connected to other boroughs and other movement around the country.
To be clear, when you say a mix, you mean some local political figures?
Yeah, correct. Yes.
And MPs?
That's correct, yeah.
Do you fear that you were stopped from investigating those claims because you suspected more than one politician of being involved in child abuse?
At the time, I just felt that it was all too uncomfortable to a lot of people.
After Clive Driscoll moved, investigations continued to look at more than 20 children's homes and are still ongoing. There have been several convictions. The Met is now looking into his claims concerning his removal from the investigation and have called him to a meeting in Scotland Yard this week.
Stephen ran crossing the road, and he ran and eventually he died up on the right-hand side of Wellhill Road there.
That experience made Clive Driscoll more determined to pursue the truth, ultimately in the Lawrence case, equally controversial. The Met's initial, flawed attempts to find his killers in the weeks that followed his death got nowhere.
We are in a position today where we have an opportunity to learn and we have an opportunity to maybe put right some of the wrongs that have come out in recent times. There was no doubt that there were mistakes made in this investigation, and there was much debate about whether those mistakes were corrupt mistakes or incompetent mistakes.
Prosecutors then didn't find enough evidence to charge anyone. The family's own private attempts to prosecute collapsed. Despite in 1999 a major inquiry where suspects had to give evidence and the first investigation was found to be flawed, in 2004, again, the CPS ruled out another trial. In your view, were most of the mistakes down to competence, or was there something more sinister?
The difference between incompetence and corruption is a bit like a bad tackle at football. The person who knows is the person who made the tackle. You know, I could be incompetent all day long if you want.
What's your sense?
My sense was I couldn't work certain things out. There were certain incidents, there were certain inquiries which didn't appear to be progressed. There were certain parts of the investigation that really didn't make any sense to me at all. But I never investigated whether that was corruption or was incompetence.
In 2005, the government changed the law. It was now possible to try suspects for the same crime twice. Clive Driscoll was put in charge. After years of disappointment, he first had to persuade the Lawrences and the key witness, Stephen's friend Dwayne Brooks, to confide and trust in him. It's your deeply held belief there were people at senior levels in the Met who were almost hoping this investigation would fail. You felt that pressure?
There were certainly people, I think, in senior levels in the Met that weren't enthusiastic about the investigation. I certainly felt that. You know, as I've said before, it is a very serious allegation to make, and I don't have evidence that I could present to any tribunal for that. But it's certainly what I felt was that people in places I would have expected to have had the enthusiasm didn't.
And you were so concerned about that, you even made that complaint to senior officers?
I actually did send an email to senior officers explaining that I felt that it could be seen. If somebody came behind and actually looked at what was going on, I think they would probably see it as a disruption tactic. So yes, I did put that in writing.
David Norris and Gary Dobson were convicted of murder. But still, the handling of the original case continued to challenge the Met's reputation. This year, an independent review found failures and reasonable grounds to suspect corruption. That inquiry asked the Met for full disclosure. Even then, Clive Driscoll says, there were discussions about handing everything over, including a document on covert recording of key witness Dwayne Brooks. You have been told of instances when senior officers have discussed holding back documents.
No, that's correct. That is correct. Yeah, and I would urge them to revisit that, and I'd urge them to think about it, and I'd urge them to realise it was the Home Secretary, and that the Home Secretary and the Mayor have every right to know what we're doing. You
know that very senior officers discussed holding back some documents with lawyers.
I mean, you could call it a culture. It could be just a mindset that you've got to defend the Metropolitan Police Service. It's the only reason you have a lawyer there, actually, to defend. Well, you don't have to defend the Metropolitan Police Service. If the Home Secretary or the Mayor asks for something, well, you give it to them. But one bad decision around disclosure undoes the remarkable work that police officers do up and down the country. And it for me, just be open and honest, warts and all.
The Met told us no relevant material was intentionally withheld. Their policy was to be open and transparent, and they're still committed to continuing the Lawrence investigation. Doreen Lawrence still speaks to Clive Driscoll most days. She has little contact with the rest of the Met. He says the relationship is as bad as just after Stephen's death, although he believes there could yet be more convictions. If you were the Lawrence family, would you trust the Met?
If I was the Lawrence family, no, I probably wouldn't.
How do you feel about that, given the years of hard work, effort, struggle almost, first of all to win their trust and then to finally prosecute the case?
I actually feel desperately sorry for them. I think that, they've lost their son, let's never forget that. They lost a much-loved son. And it's almost like they're reliving the trauma of that.
For Driscoll, the priority for the police, past and present, must now be complete and total openness. After the Lawrence case tore trust away, removing suspicions is the only path to rebuild. Before you said you weren't sure if it was incompetence or corruption in the early investigation. But what does corruption look like?
A question I've asked myself many times, what is corruption? I mean, is corruption going behind a pub somewhere and getting an envelope full of 50 quid notes and that's, corruption? Or is corruption that you don't go down a certain path, you don't follow a certain inquiry, and therefore you make someone very happy that you haven't followed that inquiry, and therefore your next promotion is easier for you, your CV looks a bit more glamorous. By the time you finish your career and at the end of your pension, you could have earned considerably more than what you'd ever stuff in an envelope. So what is corruption? And my concern is that the result for the grieving family or the victim or for justice is exactly the same, is that justice has been thwarted. And that can't happen at any costs, because the reality is that the rule of law is part of our freedom.